One of the strangest things about being human is that people are often the last person to notice what is happening to them. Most people can easily recognize major events in their lives. They remember where they studied, where they worked, who they met, where they moved, and the important decisions they made. But the events themselves are rarely what shape a person's life. What shapes a person's life is direction. And direction is much harder to see. Nobody notices the exact moment they become less curious than they once were. Nobody notices the exact moment they stop questioning things they used to question. Nobody notices the exact moment a dream becomes a memory, or when a possibility quietly turns into something that will probably never happen. Because these changes rarely happen all at once. They happen gradually, across thousands of ordinary days, and the human mind appears to be remarkably bad at recognizing gradual change while it's happening, which raises an interesting question. If some of the most important changes in your life happen slowly enough to escape your attention, then how much of your future is being shaped right now by processes you cannot even see? Today, we would explore why humans are so bad at recognizing the direction of their lives while they're still moving through it. Welcome to the Glitch Cult, where we don't just explore what people do, we investigate why they do it. Because beneath every habit, every belief, and every decision lies a psychological process that most people never notice. If there is one thing worth understanding about human perception, it is this. People do not experience their lives from the outside. They experience them from the inside. That may sound obvious, but it creates a very unusual limitation. When we look at another person's life, we naturally see patterns. We can notice how they have changed over the years. We can see the direction they are moving in. We can often recognize habits, behaviors, and decisions that are slowly shaping their future. But when it comes to ourselves, we experience life at the scale of moments, while change happens at the scale of patterns. This difference in scale makes it remarkably easy to notice what happened today, yet surprisingly difficult to recognize what has been happening for years. And because of that, it can be surprisingly difficult to recognize the larger trajectory that those moments are collectively creating. This isn't a flaw in human intelligence. It's simply a consequence of how perception works. The human mind evolved to navigate the present moment. It pays close attention to things that demand an immediate response. A sudden opportunity, a sudden threat, a sudden change in circumstances. What it is far less equipped to notice is slow transformation. Not because slow transformation is unimportant, but because it rarely announces itself. Imagine looking at a tree every single day. You would never wake up one morning and think it had grown dramatically overnight. Yet if you compare it to a photograph from 10 years ago, the change becomes obvious. The growth was always happening. You simply couldn't perceive it while it was unfolding. Something similar happens in human lives. Most of the changes that shape a person do not arrive as major events. Most of the changes that shape a person do not arrive as dramatic moments that clearly separate who they were from who they become. Instead, they unfold through countless ordinary experiences that seem insignificant on their own. A conversation changes the way someone thinks without them realizing it. A routine slowly becomes a permanent way of living. A repeated decision gradually becomes part of their character. An assumption they never questioned quietly becomes a belief about who they are. None of these moments feel important enough to remember. Yet over months and years, they begin to reinforce one another, forming patterns that slowly reshape the person from the inside. Because each individual change appears so small, the larger transformation often remains invisible until enough time has passed for it to be seen in hindsight. This helps explain something many people have experienced. Have you ever looked back at an older version of yourself and struggled to understand how you used to think that way? Maybe your beliefs changed. Maybe your goals changed. Maybe your entire outlook on life changed. Yet if someone had asked you to identify the exact moment that transformation occurred, you probably wouldn't have been able to. Because there wasn't one. There were hundreds of small moments, hundreds of conversations, hundreds of decisions, hundreds of experiences, each one insignificant on its own. But together, they formed a pattern. And that pattern slowly altered the direction of your life. This is why people are often surprised by outcomes that have actually been developing for a very long time. They are not shocked because the outcome appeared suddenly. They are shocked because they were paying attention to the moments while the outcome was being created by the pattern. In many ways, human beings are excellent at noticing events. What we're less skilled at noticing is what continues to happen, what repeats, what accumulates, what quietly moves in the same direction for years. And yet, those repeating patterns often have far more influence over our lives than the dramatic events we remember. Because a life is rarely defined by a single moment. More often, it is built grain by grain, moment by moment, like a mountain formed from wind and rain. Never in a single storm, but in the patient repetition of 10,000 days. And the quiet truth is, most people only turn to see the mountain once they find themselves already standing on its peak, shaped by slopes they never knew they were climbing. If human beings are naturally focused on the present moment, then there's another consequence that follows from it. We become very good at seeing what exists, but much less aware of what could exist. Most people can tell you what they currently have in their lives. They can describe their job, their income, their relationships, their responsibilities, and their daily routine. What is much harder to see are the possibilities that exist beyond those things. Not because those possibilities are invisible, but because possibilities are difficult to perceive when they have not yet become reality. A future opportunity rarely announces itself in advance. Most of the time, it begins as something uncertain, a skill that feels useless, a project that appears to be going nowhere, an idea that has produced no results. A path whose destination remains unclear. And because human beings naturally look for evidence, many people abandon these things long before they have had enough time to reveal their value. This creates an interesting paradox. People often expect visible results before they are willing to continue. But many worthwhile pursuits produce invisible results first. Before a person becomes more capable, they often become more confident. Before their circumstances change, their thinking changes. Before new opportunities appear, their perception of what is possible begins to expand. In other words, the first changes are frequently internal rather than external. And because those changes cannot always be measured, people often underestimate their importance. Imagine someone learning a new skill. For months, it may appear that very little is happening. The person is still inexperienced. The results are still small. The destination remains uncertain. From the outside, it may look as though they are standing in the same place. But internally, something else is occurring. Their understanding is growing. Their confidence is growing. Their ability to recognize opportunities is growing. The person who began the journey is gradually being replaced by someone else. And that transformation often starts long before the world provides any visible reward. The problem is that many people stop during this stage. They conclude that nothing is happening because nothing obvious has happened yet. What they fail to recognize is that the process was already working, just not in the way they expected. This is one reason people frequently underestimate what they are capable of becoming. They evaluate progress by looking only at outcomes. But outcomes are often the final stage of a much longer process. The earlier stages occur inside the person. A new skill changes the way they think. A new experience changes the way they see themselves. A new challenge changes what they believe they can handle. And once those internal changes begin, they often influence future decisions in ways that are impossible to predict. A person who becomes slightly more confident may take opportunities they would have previously avoided. A person who develops a new skill may meet people they would never have met otherwise. A person who continues despite uncertainty may discover possibilities that were completely invisible when they first started. This is why the future is often so difficult to evaluate accurately. People tend to judge a path based on where it appears to lead today. But many paths reveal their value only after they have already changed the person walking them. And perhaps that is the strange thing about human lives. The change isn't only about what happens around us. The deeper changes happen inside us. They affect what we believe, what we choose to pursue, and what we think is possible. We don't notice them at first, but those quiet shifts end up changing everything.